So thank you everyone for coming. I'm joined here by Joanna Young, who is with the Geophysical Institute, and she studies glaciers. And so she's going to give us a great presentation on the science behind glaciers. Before that, just a couple announcements. Unfortunately, this is probably going to be the last ski mountaineering clinic of the season. I wish we could host in-person classes this year, but dang COVID. And of course, no spring trips or anything. We do have a gear swap going on. So if you find our Facebook group, Alaska Alpine Club members, we created a subgroup, which is the gear swap. So if you have any of your gear or are looking for gear, be sure to check that out. It's an ongoing event, so it'll be up for quite a while. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Joanna. And if you have any questions, you can either save them for the end or post them in the chat.
Yeah, and feel free to interrupt me throughout too. I'm not bothered by that at all. And maybe Sean, you could help me keep an eye on the chat because it's always hard.
Yeah, sure to do.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Sean. And let me just get this going here. Can you all see that? And I'll go to full screen. There we go. And you can probably see my cursor too. Is that right? Great. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, thanks again for having me, everyone, and happy to be here. Yeah, like I said, I would gladly encourage interruptions and questions while I'm talking, because it makes it feel a little bit less like speaking into the black box void. Feel free to put on your camera, but I know people have limited internet access here, so I understand if you can't, but it's always nice to see faces too. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. And this, I guess this may be the third or fourth time that I've given this talk, and it changes a little bit because there's always something neat happening in the glacier world by the time spring rolls around for us. But I thought yeah, mostly this talk is going to be a bunch of pretty pictures of glaciers and a bunch of inspiring places. And a little bit of science and physics of glaciers, but really, really light on that side, just to sort of get us thinking about how we can approach this terrain and how you can think of it from a mountaineering perspective and sort of predict how glaciers work, what sort of behavior they have, what kind of characteristics you can expect in different zones, and that helps you travel through it in a safer way. And we have at least one other glaciologist who I know is lurking in the participants there. So Austin and anyone else who knows something about this land, feel free to pipe in at any time. So just by way of introduction, yeah, my name's Joanna, and I am actually, I've transitioned from being at the GI to being at IARC at the university. And I'm a postdoc. I study glaciers there. I'm also the director of the Alaska programs of Inspiring Girls Expeditions. So you may have heard of us either by that name or by the name Girls on Ice is one of our programs. And so I'm involved and have been for years and years with running those programs out of UAF. I've been at UAF for a while. I've got both my master's and my PhD there, and now doing a postdoc. So I'm one of those people who came to Fairbanks, thought I'd be here for a year or two, and then set up camp and fell in love with the place and the people. So been here for about 12 years now. And yeah, generally the stuff I study is the broad impacts of Alaska glacier loss and the impacts for water resources, for ecosystems, and for downstream communities. So I know a lot about how the glaciers are changing in Alaska, and my interest is really in what impacts that has downstream. Oops. There we go. So this talk is sort of broken up into 4 different general tips. I know there's a ton of text on here. We'll go through it together. And the first 2 tips in particular, I'm not really going to touch on too much, but we can go through them quickly here. I imagine this is probably the kind of stuff that you may have talked about in some of the other Zoom courses. or Zoom classes you've had. But generally speaking, oh, I've got a bit of a weird view going on, so I actually can't see the top one. There we go. Yeah, well, the first two tips, I would call them sort of tips in the, I hate this term, but soft skills realm. And the reason I hate calling them soft like that is because it sort of sounds diminutive and like they're less important or like they're less hard than some of the technical skills you need to be, you know, an effective glacier mountaineer. But I would argue that they're probably actually harder and maybe more important than technical skills. So just to touch on those, just keep in mind that getting your way through the mountains, especially glacier terrain, leadership and planning really matters. So I'd encourage, you know, knowing your team well, talking through your plans together, and yeah, generally set yourself up for success. And by that, I sort of mean long-term success. Like your goal should be to have many years of exciting mountaineering adventures. So success doesn't just have to mean, you know, success for that particular trip. And also, before an expedition, do your homework. This is one of the most valuable things I think you can do. Looking at Google Earth, we don't always have the best imagery, but it's one way. Or maps, if you can find recent maps. Certainly talking with friends and other community members. You know, the climbing listserv is a great place to throw out an email to people and say, hey, anyone been on the Cantwell lately? What's it looking like? That'll give you a really good reminder of the general crevasse patterns and maybe areas of concern along glacier routes, just so you have them fresh in your mind. You don't want to be out there halfway up the glacier and be like, oh yeah, this is this is that area I saw once that I really should be avoiding. So next I'm going to move into sort of tip 3, and tip 4 will be coming after that. This will be the bulk of the talk. So tip 3 is to be observant of the terrain and potential hazards. And there's actually a lot that you can predict, I think, in terms of glacier hazards, just by observing around you and trying to guess where glaciers might have different patterns and different features, such as crevasses, moulins, also where avalanches would happen, not just specific to glaciers, but in general. We're going to talk a bit about moraines and icebergs too. Yeah, and so the goal is to anticipate where these features might be and to understand sort of how they behave. So we'll go into that. And these are some of the questions we'll be covering. So what is a glacier? Generally speaking, we'll look at a bunch of different types and features of different glaciers. What is a crevasse? Where and why do they form? What are moulins? How do they affect your travel? What are moraines? How do they affect your travel? So just to get us all on the same page about what a glacier is and sort of how they came to be, because not all of us have necessarily lived in places that have glaciers before. I know that I did not before I moved here. Glaciers, the way I like to characterize them is that they're composed of sort of 2 characteristics. And the first one is that they are made of ice that was formerly snow. So there's some misconceptions that, you know, especially for glaciers that terminate in the ocean, that they may be at least partly a result of maybe frozen ocean water or something like that. But glacier ice is formed of snow that has compressed into ice over time and under the underlying weight or the overlying weight of layers on layers on layers of snow accumulated on top. So essentially high up in the mountains, in these high elevation regions up here, especially in Alaska, you get conditions where it's cold year round and you don't get very much snow melt happening, if any at all. And so what happens is when snow falls in those upper regions, it stays year round, even through summer. And then in the next year, you might get another layer piles on top of it. and so on and so on and so forth. And that snow at the bottom really starts to get compressed under the overburden pressure. And eventually the air bubbles will squeeze out from between the snowflakes, or will become very small and under very high pressure. And the density of that snowpack eventually turns into the density of almost as high as ice in the ice cubes in your freezer, but with some pressurized air bubbles in there. So characteristic one is that glaciers are made of snow. And then the second characteristic is that once you have enough of that ice built up in high parts of the mountains, it eventually starts to actually flow downhill and move under the force of gravity. And that can be sort of like a weird conceptual thing to wrap your head around, like the idea of a solid like ice flowing over time, but it does. And it's just a much slower flow process than maybe we're used to in sort of some other more traditional liquids. So these are the two characteristics of glaciers, and we'll see how this plays out on the land here. This is the Gulkana Glacier, which is one of our local, more accessible glaciers down in the deltas. And this photo is already a little outdated, probably 10 years ago or so, and things have changed significantly since then. But just to point out, so this is what it looks like in summertime when it's snow-free. And well, at least it's snow-free down here. This is the ablation area, so the lower elevations of the glacier. And here's where the amount of snow that accumulates over the winter does in fact totally go away and melt off during the summertime, and you have the bare ice and rock revealed underneath that. Up here higher in the mountains is the accumulation area, and up there is where snow will linger year round, and that's where all of the mass is being input into the glacier and adding to the glacier system, which eventually flows down here to the terminus. So to go over some types of glaciers, we're extremely lucky to live where we live because we're surrounded by all these different types of glacier ice. This is a photo I took of the beautiful land terminating valley glacier, the Kahiltna, in the Alaska Range in Denali, or the Central Alaska Range, if you know it as that. And land terminating glaciers is pretty self-evident what that means. Valley glaciers, they fill up a big valley in between sort of sub-ranges like this. And we'll go over the rest of them as we go through the slides. Oh, this is another photo of that same land terminating valley glacier, the Kahiltna, a little bit further up. So this is actually the glacier that climbers use usually on the west buttress route to go up Denali, but where they start is much higher up here, sort of around the corner, is where the Denali base camp is located. This is the site of where I did my master's research, and so you can really get a sense of scale of things from this photo, I think, and you can get a sense of, even in the middle of, in this, safe central portion of a big valley glacier like this, there is a ton of texture. And these are all actually, these are not crevasses or anything like that, but more meltwater channels that have been deeply incised into the ice. And so these features are 1 to 2 meters, sort of up and down all around me. But just a really incredible sense of scale here. And I think at this point, side to side, valley wall to valley wall, this glacier is about 3 kilometers wide or something. It's just totally absurd. This is a lake terminating glacier, on the other hand. This is the Portage Glacier, which many of you may have heard of, or folks may have seen down by, oh gosh, it's in the Kenai. I don't know exactly how to get there, to be honest. But this is a glacier that ends in a lake. It probably was formerly just land terminating and now has carved out a lake that it is terminating and calving some small icebergs into. We also have a lot of small little Cirque Glaciers in the deltas and the Alaska Range. This is just a little tiny Cirque Glacier hanging near the Gulkana. It's, you know, from this photo, it's even a little bit hard to tell that it's a glacier. Most of what we're seeing here is snow and maybe some debris, but there is indeed glacier ice under there. Then we have several ice fields in Alaska, and this is my personal favorite, the Juno Ice Field. This is the site where I did a lot of my PhD research. And this red line is like the root of my dreams now, because actually last summer, my husband and I were supposed to do this traverse as part of sort of a longer trip we had planned. And did a ton of research, you know, planned for a year, and we were so excited. And then, you know, COVID, so it all got shut down. But I wanted to include this just to show sort of what an ice field looks like. I think of them as essentially being, you know, if you had a bare map just of mountains, and then someone walked along and squirted icing into the middle, and you just watched the icing flow out from sort of the central pour point to have all these fingers sort of coming down in all the valleys. That's kind of what an ice field looks like to me. So a bunch of interconnected ice with these outlet glaciers. This is the Gilkey here. I think Mendenhall is here. Taku Glacier were here. So those might be some recognizable names to folks. But for anyone who ever has a chance to go and traverse the Juno Ice Field, do so, and then let me know how it was. Send me some photos, and I'll live vicariously. This is what the Juno Ice Field looks like in springtime, and this is what would make it such an incredible traverse. It's just a snowy, it's a snowy world. It's a snowy platform, and there are crevasses in these areas, but it being southeast and the coast, they see 4 to 6 to 8 meters of decent snowpack here, heavy dense snow, and so generally speaking, you're really able to travel quite safely through these areas. Oh, I should also mention, this is a photo I took from a permanent camp on the ice field. I'm going to go back for a moment. There's a program called the Juno Ice Field Research Program. I don't know if anyone's heard of that, but they have, if you can believe it, permanent camps all along the way, along this route, that have been used for science for decades. And they're on these little rocky outcrops that are called nunataks. And anyway, they're like not supposed to be accessible to mountaineers, but if you know someone, it's like that kind of situation. So that's another advantageous reason to check out the ice field, is to see these incredible views from some of those camps. We also have a ton of hanging ice, especially in our bigger mountains in Alaska. This is on the Hilton Glacier, and a photo I took very close to base camp, actually. And hanging ice is the kind of thing generally want to avoid. I think that if you're traveling along a route that goes, through something like this, like, I might suggest you reconsider some of your choices, but say you're there already and it's happening. This is an area you'd want to travel through very quickly, because you can imagine, this stuff is very unstable. You can see lots of pieces have sloughed off here, and down here, some big chunks, which we call seracs. And even if you're not traveling through an area like this, definitely, place a camp a good distance away from this stuff. Yeah, you don't want to be in the crossfire. We have a lot of, well, not a lot. We have a handful maybe more than a handful, somewhere between a lot and a handful of what we call surge type glaciers in Alaska. And these are, I think, just some of the more aesthetically beautiful things to look at when you're looking at this sort of Landsat imagery. This is the Susetna Glacier, so it's on the south side of the Hayes Range. And it's one of my favorites because it's just got these incredible loop moraine patterns. And in surge type glaciers, what happens is that often one tributary, so one branch of the glacier, might speed up quite a bit, and it will push out ice into, the main trunk here. And so you get this sort of lobe that forms because this ice is moving faster. And so that's how you get, and then eventually this is all moving downhill. So eventually you get these just incredible loopy features that tell sort of the history of the different branches speeding up and slowing down. And Sean asked if I'd been keeping an eye on the Mulcher Glacier lately because it's been in the news quite a bit. And this is another surge type glacier that we have in Alaska. It's the Mulcher Glacier is the route that the first ever team to ascend Denali used in 1913. So the Mulcher route it's a classic route, and a handful of people still do it maybe every summer, but it's definitely a lot less popular and a lot technically harder than the West Buttress route. Unfortunately, unfortunately for mountaineers, but fortunately for scientists, because it's super cool, the Mulcher is currently experiencing a surge. And I haven't really explained what that is, but if you look at me on video right now, essentially a surge is when a glacier becomes unstable, like the geometry becomes unstable. So if this is the terminus of the glacier at low elevations, and say this is high up in the mountains, so you're sort of looking at it laterally, a surge glacier will kind of build up mass in its upper parts over time, whereas it's still wasting away down below. And it gets to a geometry that's unstable, and eventually it just like speeds up and stretches out and advances downhill. And when this happens, the ice speeds up to, 10 to 100 times the velocity that it was the year before. And so this is happening to the Mulcher right now. And when that occurs, you just get this incredible crevassing and incredible sort of like blocky falling apart look to the ice. And you can see sort of this line along the sides here of a bunch of stranded ice that's just sort of stuck, on the side of the mountains. So it's really a sight to see. And unfortunately, what it means is that Denali is not recommending travel on the Mulcher Glacier route this year for the teams attempting to ascend Denali. It would just take a really long time and you wouldn't be having very much fun to travel through a route like this. I'm gonna see if I can pull this up. Can you guys see this? No. Here, let me try. Sorry, I might have to do it this way. I want to share this animation from the New York Times that's showing I don't know how good my refresh rate is. My internet's not always the best. So maybe I can send the link in the chat later. But the New York Times has picked up on the Mulcher Glacier surge and has compiled some pretty neat satellite-based video of this glacier surge advance happening right now. And it's a pretty incredible natural phenomenon. And it means this terminus down here is going to advance by, well, they're not sure how much, but it certainly could be a mile or 2 or 3. So I'd kind of like to check out the Park Road this summer and see if we can see it, see if we can see the tail end of it. I think that would be pretty incredible. All right, let me jump back to here. Am I missing any questions so far? I could just ramble about glaciers for a long time, so please interrupt me if you have anything burning. Going back to some satellite imagery, this is, or maybe it's an actual photo from the space shuttle. This is just a photo of the coast of Alaska, the outer coast. And here we can see a bunch of the different beautiful forms of ice that we have. So sort of an ice field feature here, the Seward Ice Field, Tidewater Glacier terminating into the ocean. This one in here, I can't remember what it's called, but it is a surge type, and you can kind of tell from its wiggly moraines there. And this is the famous Malaspina Glacier, which is super neat and really, I think, a great example of seeing that liquid-like behavior of a solid sort of on the landscape. You can see that the ice has been choked through from the Seward Ice Field through this tiny little opening in these incredibly huge mountains, and has just essentially poured out and filled the land like a giant puddle of syrup. So really just a sight to see. And this is, you can see this if you ever do the Juno Anchorage flight. Keep an eye out for it. You'll recognize it right away. It's very distinctive. So moving on to talking about some features, we'll talk about crevasses and where and why do they form. So the way I like to think about glaciers, which again comes back to thinking of them as having a liquid-like behavior, is that you can very much think of them as rivers of ice. So they're just moving at a really different speed than a normal river. But this is a photo of the Gulkana Glacier that I took from a helicopter. So this is the Juno Ice Field, one of its outlets. And you can just see how it meanders around these mountains, just like a river meanders through the terrain as well. And similarly, just in the same way that regular rivers have waterfalls and areas where water is falling essentially over, a steep gradient. Glaciers too also have ice falls. This is a feature called an ice fall. And they're very analogous. So the ice up here in the upper portion of the photo is falling down this very steep section, a few hundred meters at least, and ending up pouring into the main branch down below. Ice falls are generally really, really challenging to travel through, and they're very active. If you ever camp next to one, you can do that on the Gulkana. Keep a safe distance, but you can hear it just tumbling down and crashing all through the night. It's just an incredible dynamic process, and one of those sort of rare chances to see geologic processes happening like on a time scale that you can see with your eyes. So crevasses tend to happen in areas where you get what's known as like an extension zone. And what that means is essentially that the ice is under tension. The ice is moving so fast that rather than smoothly being continuous, it experiences what's called brittle fracture, and you get the ice breaking apart into chunks. And there are really specific parts of a glacier where you can expect to see crevasses. And so for example, if this is our sort of idealized valley glacier, and we're looking at it from above, if you were to look at the sides of the valley walls, the side of the glacier, you will often see these absolutely beautiful textbook 45-degree crevasses. And there's some not too difficult math to explain why those crevasses happen at 45 degrees, but essentially what's happening is that the ice at the sides is moving the slowest as a result of friction. Just the ice is experiencing friction against the valley walls, while the ice in the center of the glacier is moving fastest. And you end up having this 45-degree pattern of crevasses, and those are called like lateral crevasses, so at the side. And so what you'll also see sometimes are these transverse crevasses, and those happen when ice is like accelerating. So again, if it's going steeply over an ice fall, you may see transverse crevasses that go all the way across the entire length of the ice. And then down at the bottom as well, you may experience splaying crevasses or longitudinal crevasses. And those are a result of, if we think back to the Malaspina, ice is coming out of a constriction and it's entering into this sort of wide open space that it can fill. And what happens there is that you get these splay and longitudinal crevasses. So this is sort of an idealized version, but you also do really see this playing out on the landscape in the Delta Mountains. We have some beautiful 45-degree crevasses on the main branch of the Cantwell Glacier. You can see crevasses, similarly to a river. If you have anyone who's a paddler in the audience might know that the fastest, if you're going around a corner in the river, the fastest water is on the outside. And this is also true for a glacier as well. So if the glacier ice is going around a corner, you can expect to see crevasses all around the outer corner of the glacier, not always on the inside. So that's a place you could anticipate seeing crevasses and avoiding them. So generally speaking, your safest zone of travel is going to be up the center of the glacier. Not always, depending on corners it's going around and steepness gradients. And what you're aspiring to is to find zones that, either in the center of the glacier, or say if you're approaching a feature like this, where ice is going, up and over a steep part in the terrain, a great place to camp would be right at the bottom, because in this section down here, the ice is under compression. It's essentially being compressed because of the angle of, being at the bottom of this ice fall and then smoothing out. And an area where the ice is under compression means that everything's being held together. There's no brittle fracture. It's a great safe place to set up a camp. So yeah, here's an example of what some of those features look like in real life. Up here at the top, you can see exactly these transverse or sort of across the glacier crevasses that we talked about. And this is in an area of sort of faster glacier flow, or ice flow. So this is probably ice traveling over sort of a raised bedrock feature, and it's going up and over top of it. Here are a bunch of those beautiful 45-degree marginal or lateral crevasses. And the reason we have some in the middle here is because of this rocky feature and the fact that the ice is getting held up on this feature that's underneath the bedrock feature there. And so again, those sort of areas of ice at the sides of the glaciers are moving slowest due to friction. And the portions that are in the center of these rocky outcrops are the parts that are moving fastest. Altogether, there's not a great travel route through here, to be honest. But there are glaciers where the fast sections are much smoother. Yes, I hear someone.
I said a really quick question for you.
Yes.
Is there a situation, going back to where you're talking about being in the middle of the glacier is generally where you want to be? Are there situations where these crevasses can actually propagate from upstream and then become in the middle of the glacier, if that makes sense?
That does make sense, and that's such a good question. Yeah. The answer is that they should heal up by the time. So if you have this ice, I'm going to use my cursor on here. Say we didn't have this whole jumble down here. Say that this ice was just traveling over a steep ice fall, and then it came to sort of a lower gradient, shallower area where it was able to flow. These crevasses would heal up. They would actually close up as long as they're, once they've passed over that steep area and they're back into compressive flow or just a steady flow, they should actually close together and heal up so the ice can heal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so yeah, they're not once the feature forms, it doesn't mean that it's going to be persistent for the whole extent of its travel all the way down the glacier. And so that's also true of moulins as well. And we'll talk more about moulins. But yeah, they're not necessarily persistent features. It's more that they occur on the landscape where the bedrock underneath is causing the crevasses to be in that particular area. So if you can map out a glacier's crevasses one year, even though the ice moves maybe 400 meters on the Gulkana Glacier downhill the next year, the crevasses will still be in the same spot, in the same spot as they were the previous year, if that makes sense. Great question. Yeah, please interrupt at any time. So what do you do if you really want to cross a crevasse? This is one approach. I have not done this. You are more than welcome to. I think this is probably an Everest. This is off the internet. This is probably an Everest crevasse or something like that. But being a little more serious, is one of the best ways to be able to cross crevasses safely is if you have snow bridges working to your advantage. So snow bridges are, just what they sound like when snow piles up over the winter time, and essentially it forms a bridge over the crevasse. And so these features, they are generally safe to travel over under certain conditions, of course. The crevasse has to be small enough that the snow can span it. The snow needs to be deep enough. It's also, the more, the less fluffy and sort of, dry, fluffy interior snow, the more of a coastal snowpack you have, the better. But if you have 3 meters of Delta Mountain snow bridging a crevasse that's a meter or two, you should probably be fine. Don't use that as a rule of thumb, but generally speaking. The way to cross safely is to use a snow probe and really get a sense of exactly where the edge of your crevasse is, so you know when you have ice under you and when you don't. Mark it out for your teammates behind you on the rope team, so they know exactly when they're stepping into the void. And moving quickly is smart, but safely. And crossing, in the most perpendicular way that you can. On the other hand, snow bridges in the summertime become very, they disintegrate quite a bit. And so this is a situation to be very wary of. It could be done. Maybe Stan would do something like this. I might be a little bit, he's saying nope. I would be wary of crossing a snow bridge like this at this time of year. You can tell too, he's like in a light t-shirt. Like these are warm temperatures and that thing is disintegrating. And of course, starting to slump here, which is just not a great sign about the integrity of this bridge. To move on and talk about moulins. This is an aspect of glaciers that I don't think a lot of folks necessarily know about, and it is just the coolest thing. Glaciers are not, you shouldn't think of them as just a solid mass of ice, but instead you should think of it as a piece of Swiss cheese. If there's any Europeans on the talk, they're going to be like, Swiss cheese, it's not. Anyway, that has this elaborate plumbing system all through the ice. And so this diagram kind of shows what that plumbing system looks like if you were able to see 3D through the ice body itself. So just to point out some features, this would be meltwater channels and a little pond or a little lake that forms in the summertime when we have a lot of melt occurring on the surface of the ice. And what happens is that eventually that water, as it's flowing down the surface of the ice and coming downhill, will encounter a weakness in the ice. And often that weakness will be just like the earlier question I got, like a healed up crevasse or some other feature where the ice has had a weakness in it and it's not, perfectly intact. And the water will reach that weakness and start drilling itself down. It essentially, because it's warmer than the surrounding ice, it drills into the main body of the ice. I'm having trouble seeing my mouse. There we go. And we'll create a pipe and connect to an internal plumbing system within the glacier that eventually comes out these channels at the terminus of the glacier. By the time they get to the channel, the water is very, very brown and very milky. It's picked up a lot of sediment along the way, along the bed of the glacier. And so these spots where the meltwater at the surface enters into the ice and plummets down, and sometimes it can plummet all the way to the bed of the glacier, so hundreds of meters. Those are called Moulins. And these have got to be some of the scarier features that are out there in glacier world, because you may otherwise be traveling through fairly smooth ice that doesn't have a lot of crevasses, but Moulins could still be present. But there are certain areas in general where Moulins form, just like anywhere any sort of water feature on land, the water tends to pool where there's a depression. So if you see for some reason an obvious depression in the main body of ice, you'll often find Moulins at the bottom of that. And you'll also find them often at the sides of the glaciers. And again, the central portion of the glacier tends to be a little bit safer in this respect, but not always. And it is good to keep an eye out for Moulins even as you're traveling in the center of the glacier as well. So just to sort of prove the point that Moulins really do look like a plumbing system, like a pipe, like a circular feature, a long cylindrical feature within the body of ice. This is a photo I took of an iceberg that had calved off the Yakitat Glacier down in southeast. And this is Yakitat Lake, or Harlequin Lake, it's called rather. We saw this as we were boating by and we were like, holy cow, what is that thing? And we went closer and then of course had to clamber onto it because which I don't always recommend, but we did. And this is the scale of these kinds of pipes, these plumbing features. So this iceberg would have been, part of the main glacier at some point, and has has calved off this beautiful iceberg that has remnants of the old plumbing system still in it. So this would have at some point been part of the glacier and been fairly full, if not absolutely full, of meltwater coming through. So just incredible scale to some of these features. So Moulins can come in all sizes. This is on the Gulkana Glacier with our Girls on Ice team one summer, and we were gathered around a very small, fairly mundane Moulin here. So this kind of thing is, not something to be too worried about. Definitely go up and take a look, and you can often hear them before you can see them. You can hear the water kind of rushing in. This might not have an active water source coming into it right now. I can't actually tell. So maybe we didn't hear that one before we got there. They can also be very large. This is a photo I took on the West Fork Glacier, which is on the south side of the Hayes Range. And for scale, you have these guys, and this is I had a really hard time going anywhere near it. I was quite frightened of this thing. And it was just this roaring sound as the water was rushing into it. The West Fork has some of the biggest meltwater features, meltwater channels on the surface that you cannot go over. You just can't get up and over these things. And then Moulins this size, it's just unbelievable. We were there by helicopter. We did not get there on our own. Whoops. You may have heard of the term Moulineering before, and this is just a photo from the internet. I've never done it. It looks really neat and slightly terrifying. I would recommend it as an autumn activity. So you want to do this after all of the meltwater has stopped flowing and temperatures are cooling down, things are freezing up. That would be the most stable time of year to do it. And it would be the time of year before the Moulin has started to creep closed. Ice, experiences creep closure over the months of the winter without water inputting into it. So if anyone goes, send me a photo. I haven't done it myself. All right. I actually can't see what it says at the top of my screen because my little video thing. What are moraines? There we go. So moraine is a term that actually refers to several features that you can see in this photo. But we'll talk through them each. Moraines are these beautiful, I think, aesthetically pleasing stripes of debris that you often see at the top of, on the surface of the glacier. And so these ones here are called medial moraines. Medial just means in the middle. So it's a moraine that's in the middle of the glacier. And all of this debris, all of these chunks of rock are being eroded off of this mountain as the glacier ice travels by. And then they collect and they pool and they remain at the surface and continue and propagate all the way downstream. We also have lateral moraines, which are, again, a side feature. So any moraine debris cover that's at the side of the glacier is called a lateral moraine. And one neat thing about moraines is when you're out walking on them, the rock you may not see any bare ice. It may seem like the rock might be just, go all the way through the glacier, all the way through the entire depth of the ice. But they don't. That rock is usually just a couple meters deep at most. And underneath that, you still have bare glacier ice, which maybe has the occasional rock in it, but they're very much surface features as a result of the rocks accumulating on the surface as the melting of the ice occurs. So that's a neat thing. You might be walking along and then all of a sudden you see, holy cow, like there's a crevasse here and it's bare ice underneath this moraine. It's always kind of neat to see. I should say moraines are not always the safest travel option. I think there's a bit of a conception that crevasses don't happen through moraines. And it really depends on the glacier. That's just not always the case. I've seen some pretty big gaping crevasses that just go right through moraines. So they can be, less than ideal travel corridors. They can also be, moraines are made up of really sharp rocks. I actually don't think this photo shows that very well. But these are rocks that have just been torn off the glacier side or the mountainside by the glacier ice. They can be super sharp and very pointy and hard to scramble over. And sometimes the size of these rocks can be just, house-sized pieces. So they can be tough travel. That said, moraines can also be absolutely wonderful travel corridors. And generally speaking, on the Cantwell and Gulkana and some of the glaciers in the deltas that we travel on, as they're the most accessible, moraines are generally speaking a pretty good option for traveling over. Depending on what the ice looks like if you're in a really crevassed area, you can still get crevasses through moraines. If it's summertime and you can see everything, you can see crevasses easily, it might be faster, might be better to go on the ice. But they can make nice travel corridors. And like I said, yeah, here they can be really nice, safe camping sites. This is our Girls on Ice team. We camp on a medial moraine on the Gulkana Glacier. And the rock clast, like the size of the rocks there is just small enough that we can work with it really well and have super comfortable campsites. I wanted to mention ice caves because we have a couple really incredible ice caves that we are so lucky to have access to in the Delta Mountains. This one is the ice cave on the Gulkana Glacier, and this cave is actually the outlet flow of where that plumbing system in the Gulkana comes to at the terminus of the glacier. So this isn't just a huge plumbing feature that, you know, as you can see, the meltwater is actively coming out of it. Summertime is not a great time to visit ice caves. I say that one because of all the melting, you know, rushing meltwater that's coming out of it. But the second reason is that during melt season, you can have a lot of really active rock fall and even some ice instability, but mostly rock fall that's happening as this sort of surface here is melting out in the hot sun. So this is as close as we went into the ice cave, but you know, the Camwell and I imagine, I haven't been to this one in the winter, but I imagine it would be fun in the winter. Those are really cool features to explore in wintertime when there's no melt and a lot less risk of rockfall. If you're ever worried about rockfall, just, you know, throw on a helmet and be careful. That's the way to definitely get around that. But really unbelievable features. And Stan, can I put you on the spot and could you tell us about some of your adventures up some of these ice caves? I've heard about them.
Well, we were just on the Camwell Glacier and people had found these caves that were intermittent. So you'd go into the one cave, then you come out in the sunlight, then you go back in another cave and come out in the sunlight. So, but I was never one that, you know, Dick Flaherty was and Doug Buchanan, they'd go in and spend hours and hours, and they took small boats in with them. To cross the water, and but I never got into that. I kind of like the sunlight and being outside, but people do get into the Moulineering and ice cave-eering or whatever it would be called.
Exactly. Yeah, very cool. Thank you. I'm just looking at time and realizing I'm rammering away, so I will speed it up here. Just wanted to mention a word on ogives. If you're lucky enough to be in an area that has this feature, these are ogives, these beautiful repeating patterns of ice that are at the base of an ice flow or ice fall. That's where you'll see these beautiful patterns. And they can be intimidating when especially if they're snow covered and you don't really know what you're seeing as you're traveling up glacier, and all of a sudden you start getting these repeating patterns. You might automatically think that they're crevasses. But ogives are actually, you know, they're nothing to worry about in terms of a hazard, but you obviously can get crevasses and moulins in this area, but they are just beautiful features to see. I just wanted to say a quick note on icebergs, that the saying is true that you only see the top 10% of the icebergs. So for all of you who are sea kayakers or lake kayakers out there, do give them an appropriate amount of distance. An iceberg that's grounded, so that means, you know, it's like lodged on the bottom, is generally safe to be on. And I've definitely stood on grounded icebergs before and felt pretty fine. But the problem when they're not grounded is that as this whole portion of the iceberg is melting away, it could change the geometry of the berg, becomes unstable. All of a sudden you have a massive rolling event. And if the iceberg's big enough, those can actually be quite dangerous to be around. So use your brains and treat these guys with respect. You
can see on that last one, you can see where that iceberg had been at a different angle before, and so that shelf has formed on the right hand side, so it has actually tilted some already.
Yes, you're talking about right here. Yeah, probably. I think that's what you're talking about.
Near the surface, there's that.
Oh, here, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's an
Exactly.
old water line.
Yep.
It's been
Right.
abandoned.
Exactly. Yep. So these guys can roll. There's some amazing YouTube videos of people with really close calls with icebergs. So just to, yeah, I'll try to power through this pretty quickly. Tip 4 is that there might be a crevasse anywhere, but that's not meant to be overwhelming. It's meant to encourage you to look at the landscape and to remember these ideas about where on the landscape these features will probably be. I'm going to rush through this. Generally speaking, these are some guidelines, but again, everything is in general terms, and please use your own common sense. If you're on blue ice and the crevasses are small like this, you probably don't need ropes. You can see where the crevasses are, you can jump over them, and everything is out in the open for you to see, so there's no hidden dangers here. If you're in a transition zone where you're starting to see some snow, you're probably okay without ropes, but you do want to avoid any lingering snow. So this is a photo on the Gulkana in about June, I think. This is a sign. This is a red flag right here. You don't want to step in this. This is a crevasse where the snow is lingering and hasn't melted away yet. And so if you're on blue ice, you're good. But if you see that snow, go around or avoid it. If you're in a transition zone where like this, where it's very slushy, starting to get a lot of water features, this is where you want to start roping up, in my mind. Crevasses can be water filled in the early part of the season. And that's actually that's safer than falling into a crevasse that isn't full of water. But it also just doesn't sound comfortable. And then you're dealing with a hypothermia situation. So we generally recommend roping up for this kind of terrain. Finally, if you're in the accumulation zone, so that zone where you have persistent year-round snow, you do want to rope up in there. And here's a photo I took from a helicopter of the West Buttress route, which you can see super obviously going up the terrain here. This is why you want to rope up, because you can imagine that if you're on the trail down below, it probably just looks really flat and snowy and really solid. But when you see from the air, you can see that this route goes through some features. There's some slumping, there's some interesting, sort of potholes. You gotta wonder what's going on here. And so this is where you want to be on a rope team and travel through very safely. If you have a chance, you could always pop yourself into a crevasse and have a look down there. It's actually a really useful exercise to get to see what it looks like and to know what it feels like to be in there. So maybe if you ever did go in, you'd feel a little bit less panicked. You can practice falling. You can practice your self-arrest techniques. You want to do that off glacier, generally speaking. Practice your climbing techniques. I love this photo because it looks like this one Girls on Ice participant is just about to, take out the ankle of this one, but she's not. And of course, practice roping up. And for Girls on Ice, we do that off glacier to start before we move on to the ice. And of course, practice your crevasse rescue. Sorry, I'm moving through this quickly. One last slide just to say, when an area looks like in April, may be very different than what it looks like in September. And the long story short here is that I actually punched into a crevasse right in this zone once when I was doing some field work on the Juno Ice Field, because we'd been here in April and we thought it was so smooth and beautiful, and we couldn't imagine that there would be crevasses to worry about. But when we came back in September, things were quite different. And I did punch in. It's pretty scary, I was totally fine, but it was one of those moments where your foot's dangling above this massive void, and you're feeling very uncomfortable and very grateful that the snow bridge didn't give out underneath you any more than that. And I tell that story as just a way to say, you know, don't be complacent. If you have any concerns, any worries about, if you're just not sure what's going on in the terrain underneath you, even if it looks perfectly smooth, there's no harm in roping up. And of course, avoiding walking on those snowy crevasse-like features that we showed a photo of. Here's some resources for you all. It's my very favorite book for glacier mountaineering is still this cartoon book by Tyson and Cleland. I refer to it every single year. I'll stop talking and happy to answer any questions, and also understand if you need to sign off. Thanks for listening in.
Hello, my name is Jason. First of all, thank you for presenting. That was very good. I have a couple questions for you. First of all, and this is to anyone on the call, I'm new to Fairbanks. I moved up from Anchorage. I don't consider myself having very good glacier travel experience. I did a little bit in the Chugach, but not a lot. I have a specific question about the deltas. I'm interested in eventually going to some of the huts, like the McKeith hut, for instance. So I'm very, I would just be honest with you, because I don't have a lot of experience. I'm concerned about the glacier getting to McKeith hut. So I was wondering if you had opinions on how that is, if there's ropes needed for that.
Dan, would you take this one?
Yeah, we have this annual trip. We actually did not succeed in getting up there, where we actually drive snow machines to the base of the hill where the McKeith hut is. But we've got a GPS track that we have ground truth in the summer. So we pretty much know where the Moulins are, we know where the crevasses are, and we avoid them. In summertime, like by the time July comes around, when most of the snow is gone, then you can pretty much see where the crevasses are and go around them. So there is a safe route where we wouldn't think of roping up, that you can get right to the McKeith hut and get up there with no problem. But in the wintertime, the shortest route goes right through a crevasse field.
Dan, could you also talk about the moraine getting up to the hut from the ice? Is that a problem there?
It could be avalanche hazard. There's just a fairly steep slope initially, but it tends to be, it's south-facing slope, so it gets a lot of sunshine, gets baked and frozen and thawed, and so we've never seen a sign of an avalanche on that slope. It doesn't seem to be too much of a concern. So
thank you. One of the issues we have, Jason, in the deltas is that since a lot of the huts went in maybe 50, 60 years ago, I don't know if that's accurate, yep. Stan. Yep. Since then, the glacier ice has, a lot of those huts are on the top of the lateral moraine. So the moraines at the side on the mountain sides, and the ice has dropped, thinned out significantly since then. So you have these very steep rocky moraines to get up to them. They're usually doable, but they can have rockfall hazard. Some of the features are very dynamic too, because there's melting ice even underneath the moraines. So yeah, they like rockfall would be my biggest concern in those areas sometimes, but they're generally like, hands and foot kind of scrambling. You can usually make your way up.
Yeah, the Thayer hut there are significant hazards on some of the routes to get to the Thayer hut, and there's a fairly safe way to go around it all and avoid the steep rock.
Jason, the best thing you can do before heading out on one of your adventures is yeah, fire an email to the climbing listserv if you're not already on it, and someone like Stan will will respond and be like, "Here's what you need to know."
And get my book.
And get his book.
I absolutely will. If you can give me the listserv or maybe put it in a chat, that would be really great.
So we're actually working on moving away from the listserv because the university isn't supporting it anymore.
Oh,
so
no.
We have a Google group. Our new link is on our website. Just Google Alaska Alpine Club, and it's right on the front page. And it'll have the link to join or to request to join the group, and we'll just accept you. So that's the information on the new email list.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
And then we have a question from Curtis. What length rope do you recommend for glacier travel in Alaska?
Stan or Sean, do you want to take a jab at that one? I think it's going to depend on where.
I would say it definitely depends on where. Some of the Delta Range crevasses are significantly smaller than some of the crevasses on Denali, for example. So it really depends on where you're climbing. If you're climbing down in Washington, they might be a similar size to the deltas, or they might be smaller or bigger. So it really just depends on where you are. I would say for the deltas, I usually go, if I'm out with one person, I go with 30 meters, usually spaced by about 10, 15 meters or so. If you have 3 people, maybe just bring a 60-meter rope, and that works pretty well. Stan, do you have any input?
Well, we generally traveled with a single rope, a single, no, a double. Are they twins, or I can't remember the terminology, but I guess it was a twin, a smaller diameter rope, assuming that we're not going to take a lead fall in a crevasse situation. So we did not drag along a big old fat lead climbing rope. So, and an interesting thing is Dan Osborne talks about the drag of a rope through the snow. And he says that the old twisted type rope that nobody sees anymore have a lot less friction than the Kermantle rope, our standard Kermantle rope with all those little X's that the snow is seeing, gives you a lot more drag as you're going across the glacier.
I never thought of that.
Joanna, I've got a question. So in the medial moraines, you said that the moraines are mostly a surface feature, but do the glaciers kind of entrain the rock into the ice as well?
They do, yeah. It's not a solid band of rock all the way down to the bed of the glacier. It's more that you have continuous solid glacier ice with occasional flecks of rock through it. So within that column, you will still have that entrained debris, but it's when the ice is melting at the surface that you get the accumulation of all the debris on the surface. And so, yeah, usually our moraines are only a couple feet or maybe a couple meters deep. They look like such solid features. They look like they must go all the way through, but if you dig down, you'll find bare ice underneath.
Great, thanks.
Hey, Joanna.
Hi, Zach.
Thanks for this talk. This is great. So about the Muldrow and the surging, do you think that if we were to go camp out there and hike up next to it, could we hear it at night or see it?
Yes.
I mean, I know we'd be able to see the glacier, but would we see movement and that kind of thing? Or
I think I just saw this the other day. I think the movement right now is something like 10 meters a day.
I believe
So
I've
you-
seen up to 20 meters a day.
Up to 20.
According to the glacier.
So if you stare at it long enough, yes, but also like during that time, you would see jumbles, seracs falling, and there have been I heard from a Park Service geologist, I think he is, that they went out to put out some cameras to do some monitoring while it's surging, and while they were installing the cameras, it was just like thunderous sounds across the valley as these pieces are falling around. Yeah, I would love to do that. I think that would be, and having the opportunity to see a surge glacier is becoming like an active surge in process is becoming less and less common. At least some people think it's becoming less common as a result of climate change, and glaciers that used to formerly be on a pretty routine surge cycle, like Black Rapids, was expected to, if it was following its usual cycle, it should have surged by now, but it's showing absolutely no signs of doing that anytime soon. So it would be really, really special to see that. That'd be incredible.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think we need to get our backcountry permits here soon for that.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Great question.
Well, are there any other questions before we wrap it up tonight?
Is there pizza?
Yeah.
I wish. As soon as we can meet in person, there will be pizza. Lots of pizza.
And enough pizza
Well,
to make
thank
up
you
for
so
this.
much. I am calling from, this is actually somewhere in the Keys range, up towards peak 8230 off the Black Rapids Glacier. Curtis just asked
cool.
where I was calling.
Wow, it's amazing.
well-
There's cell phone reception there.
And really good cell phone reception. Well, thank you so much, Joanna. That was a great presentation. We will go ahead and post this on our website if anyone missed it. So feel free to share it around once it gets posted. It's like Curtis is asking if he can email you, Stan. Sounds like he has some questions. Perfect.
Yeah, there's
And you can also,
my email address.
and then also, like Joanna said, just email either the listserv while it's still up or the new group. I'm sure someone will respond. We've made a Facebook group. So if you're on Facebook, feel free to join and ask questions there. We also have set up a gear swap. It's not the same as previous years. It's on Facebook Marketplace instead. So if you join the group, then you can post all of the gear that you're wanting to sell. You can look for other people's gear. I wish we could hold it in person because it's always better that way, but I think this is the best considering the circumstances. This is the last meeting of the Ski Mountaineering Clinic for this season. So thank you so much, everyone who's listened in on the previous lectures. We've got all of those posted on the website as well. Hopefully next year we can do all of this in person again with pizza.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean, for hosting. And yeah, thanks
Yeah.
everyone for great questions, and Stan for jumping in. That was really fun.